back here, Radio Row, although they're calling it Media Row this year.
Yeah, why is
because
that? Why?
not as many radio stations here.
Yeah,
Because it's gone more digital. Fewer radio stations sending the whole armada. So it's Media Row now, a member of the media who's been covering Super Bowls. Your first Super Bowl was 48, right?
A memorable
Infamous.
one for many people. Yes, infamous for many. Yes, the one in New York. The one in New York.
And you can't see it, but we are literally sitting below a Super Bowl 48 banner.
Yes.
It's
very
almost like
ironic.
they said, oh, Denver's there. So this is Frank Schwab, who, former Broncos beat writer, has been with Yahoo for a while covering all things NFL. And, of course, I'm Andrew Mason. And so, all right, you still live in the Denver area, of course.
Indeed.
You've seen the ebbs and flows of the Broncos and how their fans react. So from your national NFL view, but being in Denver, sort of your first thoughts looking back on this Broncos season and kind of what it even kind of galvanized in the community as you saw it.
I thought it was great for the Broncos.
Yeah.
Like, it was, the franchise had to move forward in some way, had to have some success. You get stuck in this rut and all of a sudden you become the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Yeah.
You know, like, and not that the Broncos were ever going to be that bad, but to just have something positive happen, to have Bo Nix come alive and be, look, I don't know, like, people could say they were optimistic about Bo Nix, and I believe it because the Sean Payton factor. I don't think anybody thought Bo was going to play this well.
Yeah.
It was such a great season for him, such a good growth season for the Broncos when they had the salary cap issues with Russ's stuff, when I thought there were plenty of holes on the roster. I had them ranked really low early in the season, but, you know, Sean Payton, he's never going to be that bad.
How low?
I think I had him 30. I swear.
Not 32nd. I mean,
No,
there,
I didn't-
there
I
have
didn't.
been a lot. There have been some
because
30 seconds out
I'll
there.
be honest,
Yeah.
a lot of it was Bo. A lot of it,
Yeah.
I just was skeptical about Bo Nix, and they couldn't do much in free agency. And I saw, look, I didn't foresee Zach Allen having this type of a season. I didn't foresee Patrick Surtain being Defensive Player of the Year. I did early on. I do have some receipts from very early in the
Yes.
season when I said I thought he could be Defensive Player of the Year. But everything came together in a way I just didn't think would happen. And I think they honestly overcame a lack of a running game. They overcame some issues at tight end. And, I mean, their offense, it still has a lot of work to do. I know we're going to talk about that. But I just give a lot of credit to Bo Nix lifting this team and being way, way better than I thought he'd be his first year.
And not only being better than a lot of people thought, but you look at those first couple of games, and part of it's a reminder to not judge a quarterback after his first two games.
Yeah.
But if you took the first two games, and even that first month, which included that game in the rain in New York in Week 4 that the Broncos eked out.
Like the Seattle game. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, he never threw, like, he was, it was almost like, wow, he's incapable of throwing the ball downfield. But you're right, like, September matters nothing, like the rookie quarterback.
I mean, I even look like at the Jets game. I mean, he gets his first touchdown pass in Week 4 to Cortland Sutton. And it just happens because Sutton makes this amazing adjustment on the ball, and it wasn't a great throw.
No.
And then, bit by bit, it started to click. I look actually kind of at the key moment. I was talking about this with Jay Glazer of Fox Sports this week. The moment against the Raiders, they're leading, but they're not quite putting them away. And then Sean Payton yells at Bo on the sideline, and then Bo yells back.
That was big.
It was huge. Yeah.
A lot of this stuff is so narrative street and whatnot, but I think that at that point, not only Sean Payton thought differently of Bo Nix after that, but I think everybody else thought differently of Bo Nix after that. Like, this guy's going to stand up to Sean. All right. Okay, we got something here. You need that out of your quarterback sometimes. And I never, people make such a big deal about sideline fights.
Yeah.
Right? Like, this happens. Like, I'm not
all
talking
the
about,
time.
I'm not talking about fist fights. Like, they'll take it too far. But guys arguing on the sideline, no big deal. It's part of football. And it's actually a good part of football. Like, there should be passion. There should be emotion. That was a big deal. Yes, I agree with it. With you on that one.
It was a moment that I think crystallized why the Broncos had to make the change at quarterback, because you flash back to December of the previous year, and everything goes askew there in Detroit and goal to go, and Sean Payton is just tearing into Russell Wilson, and he just stands there blankly. Now, Russ has that stay neutral thing that he tries to go with
He sure does.
mindset-wise, but it's clear in that moment that, okay, this marriage, it was already failing. Like, okay, here's the very visual example of why this pairing simply does not work. And then you get to the following October and you see him come back. And really, I mean, Bo had a couple of touchdowns after that. They pull away from the Raiders for a blowout win. It seemed like that was sort of the moment. It was also even like the teammates saw it like, yeah, you know, I mean, that fire, that's what we need around here.
That game was a turning point, too. And, I mean, obviously the Surtain play. Like, at that moment, Raiders are going in for the touchdown. What, they're going to go up 14?
They're going to, because it was 10-3.
I thought it was 10-3. Yeah,
10-3.
That kind of changed the whole season around. The rest of that game, including the Knicks stuff.
Changed the Raiders season, too.
It did. It really did. It really did. At that moment, before that, Minshew threw that pass that Surtain picked off, you were like, this is like, you don't think the Broncos are going anywhere at that point. You're like, maybe the Raiders are. Yes, you're right. A complete turning point in the season. Very, very interesting how that went. Look, I mean, this was the only thing, and not that this is a bad thing in any way, but I wonder if the bar gets raised too high for next year. Where you're like, okay, well, this happened in year one. Next year's going to be even better. Add 3-4 wins with Bo Nix being better. There's some plexiglass principle involved here.
Yes.
Where you have such a huge improvement year over year. Your next step might be a little bit backwards, but I think the foundation is there, and that's the important part.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you mentioned that because you said earlier Zach Allen took that step forward.
He was unbelievable this year. I didn't think he had that in him.
I think he should have been first-team All-Pro based on what he did.
I'm totally fine with that.
Yeah. Nick Bonito reaching another level. Pat Surtain, of course, Defensive Player of the Year. Can you count on all of those things, that level of performance next year? I think that's a fair question. I mean, you don't know when the peak is. You don't know if you've already reached peak. Whatever.
But the defense was incredible.
Yeah, was that the defense's peak, especially given that down the stretch we definitely saw some cracks there, especially against the run. But of course, when they were without Riley Moss and they had to put Levi Wallace in and Cleveland went right at him with Jerry Jeudy, we saw the defense get gashed.
A little bit, yeah.
Really, except for the game where the Chiefs threw their backups out there. It's the one thing that if I'm concerned about anything for the Broncos heading into this offseason next year, it's that the defense got exposed a bit late.
A little bit. And defense isn't as sticky as offense from year to year.
Yeah.
If you have a top 5 defense one year, it doesn't really mean you're going to have a top 5 defense next year. Like, stats prove that.
Yeah.
There's very few exceptions. So, I mean, Cleveland's a good example of that. Cleveland had a great defense last year. And then
all-time defense looked like for a while.
Yeah, the Jets, too, just fell apart. It does happen on defense. I don't think the setback's going to be that bad. I trust the players they have, the guys that took a step forward. Even if there is some regression involved, it's not going to be to the point where you're really worried about that. Yes, they had some bad games on the stretch, but you're going to go into this offseason and improve some things. I don't think the defense is going to take that big of a step back. I really don't. A little bit maybe, but they're going to be really good. And getting Vance back is just huge.
Yeah, getting Vance back and then keeping a guy that you and I both know, Jim Leonard. There was interest in him.
Smart guy.
Yeah.
He should be Wisconsin's head football coach right now, but that's a different show.
Nobody
wants to talk about that.
This is Denver sports. If we were doing Wisconsin sports right now,
a half hour on that.
Yes, we would have the conversation that Jim Leonard should be back there. Of course, does he even want to go back to the college ranks? Because
he's a smart guy. He's such an asset for Denver. I can't say enough about Jim Leonard, how good he is as just a coach, a guy, players respect. Yeah, he's a heck of a football mind.
The way his safeties talk about him, it's with this mixture of fondness at how he relates to them, but also kind of there's a little bit of reverence there.
Yeah.
For what they've learned from him, and I think
wouldn't shock me if he's an NFL head coach in next 5-10 years.
Wouldn't shock me either.
Because he'll be a defense coordinator next, and I think he's going to do well at that.
I think there's a scenario where if it succeeds for the Broncos, if Sean Payton does succeed here, I don't think it's inconceivable that Jim Leonard someday succeeds Sean Payton.
Wow.
Like that's
interesting.
I'll plant my flag on that one.
I like that.
Like long term.
That's bold. I like that.
Now that involves the Broncos succeeding in years down the line, but I think he's kind of got the right.
He's got that look. Yeah.
He's got that look to him.
Yeah.
This actually, and this is another thing, we saw the Broncos staff get poached not on a head coaching level, but Johnny Morton goes to goes to Detroit. David Shaw was working in personnel, takes David Shaw with him. Declan Doyle goes to Chicago. They keep Vance Joseph. They keep Jen Leonard. Another key retention was Davis Webb, the quarterback's coach, who appears to be a really hot name and someone who's on the rise right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you want to keep those coaches together, but as long as Sean's there, you trust that he's going to make the right moves as far as his staff goes, and he's such a great coach. He's a Hall of Fame coach. Yeah. I truly believe that. I think he's going to Hall of Fame someday, and I think his time in Denver is going to push him toward that. So, so long as Sean's there, he'll make the right moves, and there's always going to be attrition. That's the beauty of being a good team. Almost look at the Detroit Lions. There's both coordinators. It's almost a sign of respect for what you've done. It's a sign of respect for what the Broncos have done. That it's not a good news in the offseason when nobody wants any of your head or assistant coaches. Like that means
that means you didn't have a good season. Yeah. And not only that, the Jets with Aaron Glenn and the Lions with Dan Campbell. Now, it's not the Shanahan-McVay tree, but Sean Payton's tree is starting to get some branches here because both Glenn and Campbell were assistants of his in New Orleans.
Is this the Payton tree or the Parcells tree? Because we have a big tree and a bigger tree and a bigger tree. Yeah.
Well, I mean, sort of, if we're talking about the Shanahan-McVay tree, are we talking about Mike Shanahan or are we talking about Kyle Shanahan? Because we could say it's actually Mike, which is sort of another discussion. That actually brings me to something I want to talk about indirectly, because Mike Shanahan was not a Hall of Fame finalist. Mike Holmgren was. Mike Holmgren did not reach 80%. And first of all, I would argue Shanahan over Holmgren in terms of Hall of Fame finalist. But I look at Mike Holmgren not being in and Bill Cowher being in, and I'm a little bit baffled here given that Holmgren took two different teams to Super Bowls, did win one. Cowher was also 1-1 all with Pittsburgh. But turning around two teams, Seattle wasn't destitute, but they had missed they'd missed the playoffs for a while. And when Holmgren went to Green Bay, they had missed the postseason. I believe it was 9 years in a row when he took that job, and it became a 10th, and then he got them back to the playoffs. So I'm struggling to see what the Hall of Fame is doing with tweaking some of the selection criteria and trying to maybe gatekeep a little bit.
Year, by the way. Very small class.
Smallest class since 05.
Yeah. And I'm glad to see Sterling Sharp get in, by the way.
Yes.
Long
overdue.
He's in that Terrell Davis mode of just an unbelievable player, and do you really hold it against him that he only played 7 years? He got a neck injury. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
Why do you think Mike Shanahan's not in the Hall of Fame? Because I can't figure it out. Like, I believe he's the only multiple-time Super Bowl winning coach not in. Is that correct?
The other one is George Seifert.
Now, Seifert, and we get that, yes.
George Seifert is the example of you can coach your way out of the Hall of Fame.
Because everybody just gives Walsh all the credit, which, Bill Walsh was awesome.
But 2 Super Bowls with San Francisco, I mean, 2 is typically a path. It was so bad in Carolina. Like, it was, a couple of mediocre seasons, but he's got that 1 in 15 anchor tied to him right now.
And Shanahan doesn't have that, though.
Well, he's got a 3 in 13.
Here's a big thing, and I wrote about Steve Spagnuolo today and said, this guy's a Hall of Famer. He's impacted winning more than a lot of guys in the Hall of Fame.
Yes.
Like, nothing against, like, Tony Dungy, but Steve Spagnuolo is going to end up impacting Super Bowls more than Tony Dungy did. Mike Shanahan was a great coordinator with the 49ers in '94. That is on Shanny's resume.
Yeah.
So I think when you add the 94 49ers to the 2 Broncos teams, they were always competitive throughout Shanahan's run there. I mean, Peyton Manning got in the playoffs a couple times, so those games were competitive. I don't know why Mike Shanahan's not in the Hall of Fame. And look, Mike didn't really get along that well, all right? Like, it's not like I'm sitting here as a homer, like Mike's my buddy.
All of us had moments.
Yes, all of us had moments
with Mike. Back
so
in
this
the day.
isn't said from a standpoint of me and Mike get along really well. This is me respecting him as a head coach. I don't get why he's not in the Hall of Fame. All these other guys, we talk about Seifert, you can say, okay, well, Bill Walsh built it. You can't say that about Mike. It's not like Dan Reeves and Wade Phillips built this up for Mike and he just took the wheel. Like, that didn't happen. I think the coordinator stuff is so underrated. Like, when you are a coordinator and basically the main play caller of a team, a great team like the 94 49ers. That is on your resume, and that should matter. And then obviously 97 and 98 matters so much. I don't get it, and I think it's the fact that it doesn't seem like he's ever been that close.
Yeah.
It really is weird to me that
you keep thinking he's going to get through the coaches subcommittee, and then year after year, I mean, I'm fascinated to see, like, with Holmgren now, like, do they push him back in, or it's okay, let's just try somebody else? But what we've got out here is a situation where I feel like you've got at least one coach in Bill Cowher who has a lesser resume than Mike Shanahan or Mike Holmgren, and he's and both the Mikes are still out. And we haven't even talked about Tom Coughlin, who I think another two-timer, but also part of the CV there is the most successful expansion launch in NFL history is the Jacksonville Jaguars in the 1990s.
Yes.
And he was running the football ops for that.
And here we are 25 years later.
Yes.
And the Jaguars,
There's this is going back to growing up and having part of my youth in Tampa, but I remember back when the Bucs were in their long run of struggling, people said they won too soon because they got to the NFC Championship. They started so bad in 0-26, but in year 4 they were within one game of the Super Bowl in the NFC Championship, and that they couldn't push over the top from that, and it's like they spoiled everybody early. And I do wonder if there's some of that with Jacksonville. They were too good too soon. Maybe. And then they had those two chances in the championship game. 96, I think they were just kind of too young. They weren't ready.
What do you think?
But 99,
let me ask you something.
Is the miss.
Because I was obviously growing up in Wisconsin at the time. If the Broncos beat the Jaguars in 96 and go on and go to Super Bowl 31 and play the Packers, who wins?
Green Bay.
I think so, too. Even though what happened in Super Bowl 32, I think that Green Bay got very complacent after Super Bowl 31 and just thought, like, hey, we're 13.5-point favorites. We're going to roll this Broncos team. So I think it would have been different in 96. And then how does that play out for the rest of the Elway career? Does he ever win one? Like, people talk about that Jaguars loss still, the old heads like us.
Yes.
Still talk about that Jaguars loss in 96, but without that Jaguars loss, maybe the Super Bowls don't happen. You just don't know. There's butterfly effect here.
There is, and I think it would have been a 5th Super Bowl loss for the franchise and a 4th for John Elway. Man, I don't know if they bounce back from that. I mean, what does John Elway think if he gets to the Super Bowl again and loses
to a great Packers? The 96 Packers are one of the underrated teams of all time. I'll die on that hill.
And as we saw in the Super Bowl, they were a three-phase team. I mean,
special teams are awesome.
You had a Hall of Fame quarterback. You had Reggie White at the apex of his powers.
Player of all time, maybe.
Yep. And then, out of all that, Desmond Howard wins the MVP.
Yeah, he was great that year, by the way. It's just interesting. I'm so fascinated by butterfly effects. So fascinated by it.
We've done a few shows with that in the off season, like what if. Like that's a real interesting what if, because the other thing is, a lot of players have told around that 97 team have told me that they were fueled by losing to Jacksonville.
Absolutely. I did. I did a 10-year anniversary in 07 when I was covering the Broncos. Every one of those guys talked about the Jaguars loss fueling them.
So they could have been fueled by getting the Super Bowl and losing, but I think the thing you just wonder, like what the atmosphere around it would have been like losing for Denver as a city to lose a 5th Super Bowl. It's different.
It's different losing. You get that far, and again with the John factor, it would have been, oh man, this is just never going to happen. You feel defeated at that point. Whereas the Jaguars loss was crushing, but it's weird. It's weird how that happens. It wasn't on the biggest stage. Mm-hmm. You didn't win an AFC Championship, but yet that doesn't sting as much because you didn't make. I don't know. It's weird. It can be weird that way. That losing in a Super Bowl is actually worse than just losing beforehand.
It's the whole thing of you've got to climb the mountain again.
Yeah,
it's because it is the cliche, but you do start from zero. And the other interesting thing about losing a Super Bowl is that we see a history now. A team loses the Super Bowl, and the following year, it's not like they take that last step. It's more you regress.
49ers.
Yes,
and just. It's the NFL. Things just happen against you. Look at the 49ers. Yeah. All the injuries they had. McCaffrey barely plays this year, and Ayuk blows out his ACL. It's just, that's why the Chiefs run, and I know people are sick of it, but the Chiefs run is so impressive because it is so hard to just get all these green lights you need to get to the Super Bowl. Like, you can't have, like, if you remember when Patrick Mahomes dislocated his knee in Denver on the quarterback sneak, what if that's a worse injury? That they don't go to the Super Bowl that year. Like, stuff like that where you just have to catch so many breaks just to make it back to the Super Bowl that it's hard. It is incredibly hard, and that's why, even though I have Chiefs fatigue too a little bit. I wasn't so thrilled to have to cover this team in a 5th Super Bowl in 6 years, but I respect what they've done because it is so hard to do it.
And I look back at that injury when it happened. It was 2019.
It was 19, okay.
They were playing the Broncos.
Monday night game. Yep.
Thursday night game.
Thursday night, okay.
He gets hurt.
I knew it was prime time because I was there, yeah.
And they play, the next couple of games are against a good Packers team, and they lose. Then they, at home, they beat the Vikings, and I believe that was the year the Vikings beat New Orleans in the playoffs. That was a very good Viking team.
Yep, the Minneapolis Miracle year, yeah.
And then they go to they took a dip. They lost, so they lose 2 of 3, and I think in that third is when Mahomes came back, but then it's cruising out
to the races after that.
The other thing is Mahomes, I mean, sometimes I think the guy is made of elastic because of how he gets bent around and
you think, this is it, and then he's just back the next series.
Is he made
he's
of
tough,
something
dude.
different?
He's a really tough
He is.
Dude.
Is it the weapons grade Toradol? I don't know. I mean,
could be. If you've obviously been around Mahomes, he's a big guy.
Yes,
he's a big human being. Like we underrate how big quarterbacks are, and that helps him too. There's the size factor when we talk about how big quarterbacks are and stuff. That helps him stay healthy a lot. But yeah, I mean, you got to get lucky. Just some things are so out of your control that this hit. Sometimes it's going to be a torn ACL, and sometimes you're going to bounce back. Like it's luck of the draw at some point.
And I do respect the Chiefs getting back because of how it is so difficult now.
It's so hard. There's a reason nobody's ever done a Super Bowl three-peat.
And they people are going to pick at their roster again. I mean, we're I don't think we're going to see Nick Bolton, for example. If the Chiefs are back here a year from now, I don't think Nick Bolton's a part of that.
I agree.
They every year.
I wonder if Travis Kelce's a part of it next year.
Yeah.
I mean, if they win a third in a row, what else does he have to do? Go tour with Taylor for a while, right? I mean, whatever. If he wants to keep playing until the wheels fall off, I have no problem with that. But at some point, you're just like, I'm good. I just won a third in a row. I think I'll be fine. I could see it happening.
I could at the same time. He's already at that point, even before the three-peat. I mean, a three-peat, I guess, is the ultimate thing. But he's accomplished everything a tight end can do.
There's nothing more that's going to go on his resume after this. If you win a 4th Super Bowl, it's not like, that's what you needed to push you past Gronk or whatever. Either you think he's the greatest tight end of all time or you don't at this point.
I mean, I'm probably going to sound a little bit naively optimistic from a Denver perspective. I do think when he steps away, that's maybe when we see the half step back, because they do have some good young tight ends on the roster. But the thing that I think is kind of the secret sauce that you can't replicate is he and Mahomes have such preternatural cohesion that if they've got 3rd and 3,
everybody knows where the ball's going,
and nobody stops
nobody can stop it because Travis could just, as you said, they're on the same wavelength. Travis is going to run this route, and Patrick is going to figure out exactly where he's going to be, even if they've never talked about it before. It happened in the 13 seconds game, I believe, against the Bills, where Kelce pretty much ran a route that they hadn't talked about it, and it just hits for the big play to set up the field goal.
It's like they share a brain.
Yeah, it is really. It is really, when you get that kind of level, it's pretty wild. By the way, another thing about the half step back, and I do agree with you. But part of it's the division. The division's getting a lot better. You look at the coaches. I know you've talked about that a bunch. The Chargers are coming. The Chargers. I did not think Chargers would be good this year. I'll cop to that too, because I thought, come on, Harbaugh's been away for 9 years. Their roster's not that good. It's not set up for him to win. For them to go to the playoffs, I know they struggled in that playoff game. Chargers are coming. Obviously, the Broncos had a great step forward. Raiders are the Raiders, but Pete
now
Carroll at least is going to raise the professionalism there.
He's going to raise the professionalism, and you have an offensive coordinator in Chip Kelly who has a history of you give him anything at quarterback, he's going to maximize it. I mean, this guy got an all-time type season out of Nick Foles.
Yep. If you look at the quarterbacks he had in the Eagles, it was Mark Sanchez, it was Nick Foles, they had some weird quarterbacks. It's so funny.
They had Sam Bradford, I think.
Sammy. Yep.
They were all productive.
Yeah, they were all productive. And it's funny when Chip Kelly was just getting ripped up and down his first stint in the NFL, and then everybody basically stole from him and started running all the college stuff. He was an innovator. There was like a 30 for 30 to be done about Chip Kelly's influence on the NFL. Yes. And he was just run out of the NFL as fast as he could by the old guard, basically. I'll stick to that. I think that people wanted Chip Kelly to fail in the NFL, but at the same time, everybody was like, well, this RPO stuff is really interesting, and it works at this level. Wow. Now, you see his fingerprints everywhere in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly don't really look at that 49ers season in 2016.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was like a car falling apart on the highway.
Yes.
Like you've got, I mean,
everything went bad.
The wheels are coming off, the hubcaps, everything, it was, nobody would have had a chance that year.
I agree with you.
And so I think this is the step maybe for Chip Kelly to be a head coach somewhere in the NFL.
I can see it.
I could completely see it. But, I mean, that's the worst team in the division, and yet they're going to be capably run on the sideline.
Yeah.
I mean,
they need to figure out
Pete
quarterback
Carroll
and get an infusion of talent.
But Pete knows what he's doing. Pete knows how to maximize and wring everything out of what he has in that moment.
Culture
that's part of
too.
his history.
I mean, things are going to change for the Raiders. Like that,
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's going to mean a ton more wins for them because there's still a lot of talent issues on that team. But yes, if that's a worst team, the worst team in your division is coached by Pete Carroll, like that's a pretty good division.
There's never been a division with this level of coaching, top to bottom. I mean, 3 of the 4 have won a Super Bowl.
Yeah.
The only one who hasn't, Jim Harbaugh, I think objectively is a top 5, top 6 coach, and proved it again.
And he won a national title. I mean, that's not nothing.
And it's interesting with the Chargers. They beat the Broncos twice. So you may look at like the head-to-head and say, okay, are they ahead of the Broncos? You might say, yeah, they probably are a half step ahead of them. And both those teams, they have similar big needs because the Chargers and Broncos are both going into this offseason and saying, okay, we're really fortified on the interior, strong up front. We've got the quarterback that we believe in.
Yep.
But we got to get him some weapons here.
Yeah,
that's the thing. The Chargers, with Jim Harbaugh, he put everything into building up that line. And really, in terms of their team building this past year, sacrificed their skill guys. And now it's rebuilding that up.
Now it's time to go get a running back.
Yeah.
Go get another. Ladd's really good. Ladd McConkey's really good. But a number 2, just like Sutton. Like Sutton's really good. Now I think there's some guys in house for the Broncos. It could be that. Like there's some guys that made strides. Young guys.
Marvin Mims Jr. When they figured it out with him.
Yeah, I think I've always been waiting for him because Sean moved up to get him his first pick with the Broncos, and you're like Marvin Mims. The skill set's there. You can see the talent. He just needs to put it together. And I think it's going to happen. I think Mims is going to. I still believe in Mims being a 1,000-yard receiver down the road.
It's wild that it took lining him up in the backfield to unlock it, because you could almost see like the confidence was wavering in him a little bit as the playing time and the snaps weren't there. And then to get him a few snaps, get the ball in his hand one way or the other. Yep. And then after that, it was like he started to expand as a receiver. Right. And then we first started seeing him in the backfield against Kansas City in early November. And then less than a month later against Cleveland, he's catching a perfect pass from Bo Nix and going 93 yards to the house.
Yeah. I mean, when a guy is an all-pro returner, you know he's got skills with ball skills. He can do some things. And but guys like that take a step forward. The tight end situation has to get figured out.
They got to fix that.
Same with the Chargers, too.
Yeah.
So you draft a tight end. You draft a running back in the middle rounds, maybe. It could come along fast. I could be talking about the Chargers or the Broncos right there because both teams, like you said, very similar needs as far as they built up the foundations. Now you got to get some skill guys to go along with the talent you do have.
And I think this is the difference between like what the Patriots had in their dominance and what the Chiefs have. there was never a viable, sustained challenge within the division. You had
100%.
the Dolphins broke through and won the AFC East back in 2008, but that was a one-off. It was the year that Tom Brady was hurt.
21 years, however many they won.
And then the Pats went right back and won another 11 division titles in a row. The Jets had a moment, but they couldn't build on it.
Right.
I think in the West now you have at least two teams that are maybe like a piece or two away here with the Broncos and the Chargers. And then the Raiders, who, for all that is wrong with them, they have two legit elite players who if you went and said, okay, who are the 20 best players in the league? You're not making that list without Max Crosby or Brock Bowers.
I'd agree. I mean, maybe non-quarterbacks.
Yes.
They're different. It's almost a different conversation. But yes, if you were to ask who's the best tight end in the NFL and who's the best pass rusher in the NFL, if you said those two guys, I'd be like, okay, I prefer Myles Garrett, but you might be right about Brock Bowers, and Max is probably third on that pass rusher list. That's a pretty good place to start. So there's a foundation there. They nailed that draft pick with Bowers. Like they
my gosh!
And again, like they were very disappointed. It was a consolation prize because I'm sure they thought they were getting Penix, but then you're like, okay, we'll just take Brock. And people criticize. They're like, well, you got Meyer already. You drafted him in the second round last year. Why you drafting another tight end?
Well,
it's because he's a generational talent. That's why.
And I worry that with someone like Tyler Warren, who probably is going to go higher than Brock Bowers, and I think Tyler Warren's really good, but I think there's a little bit of a market correction going on.
Oh, yeah.
Bowers should have gone in the
Genti,
first 4 picks. Yeah.
Yeah. And you look at the
year.
Jets passing him and everybody. And Fashanu's going to be a good tackle. But, yes, I think that there's a market correction with tight end, and then the running back resurgence, I think, changes it, too. I think when you look at the value, like, not that – look, there's always going to be teams that don't invest a ton in running back, but you see Saquon Barkley here on the Super Bowl, Derrick Henry or Josh Jacobs, and you're saying – well, Genti, maybe he's going to go higher than we thought because people are all of a sudden saying, you know what? If you have a really, really good running back, it helps your offense in a ton of ways.
If you were the Broncos, would you be willing to move up for either Genti or Warren? If so, how much?
Warren more than Genti.
Yeah.
I still am on the. You can get a good running. You can get a Bucky Irving in the middle rounds. Yeah. Like instead of having to use first round capital on him.
I think this year's Bucky is Devin Neal, by the way.
Really?
Kansas.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead. It's a good call out. Yeah, I could see that. So if you got to get both, and I don't mind. Like if the Broncos were to invest a first round pick in a running back, I don't even hate that because they really had nothing at that position this year. Look, you just got to get better. Javonte, the injuries took a toll on him. Esteban's fine, whatever. But you just need a difference maker running back that they just don't have. But I just think it's really, really tough to find a dominant tight end. So if you had to prioritize, I'd prioritize tight end first.
Yeah, I mean,
because it just changes your offense.
Yeah.
And look what Sean did with Jimmy Graham, and I mean, just it can. If you have a matchup piece, a chess piece, a tight end, it totally changes your offense.
If they don't go tight end round 1, the guy that is really kind of burrowed in my head right now is Elijah Arroyo out of Miami, who, watching him down at the Senior Bowl last week, just appears to have that game-changing ability down the field, but he is just so raw. Like he didn't really break out until this past season down at the U, and I think certainly he's a long way off as a blocker, but is, if you don't get that guy round 1, but I mean round 1, Tyler Warren I think requires trading up. Colston Loveland of Michigan is going to be in the conversation as well, but I'm not sure he's as dynamic as Tyler Warren right now. But the one thing I will say for the Broncos, and I even say it for the Chargers too, is this draft does mesh with depth at their needs, and depth that you can put them in and they can have an immediate impact on this. I mean, and rarely do you kind of sit there and say, oh, you're picking in the 20s, you can find an immediate impact guy. I think both of them can, and that's why I don't think the gap to Kansas City is as large as it might seem. Certainly on the field with the Broncos, when you're a blocked field goal at the gun away from beating them, at least in the head-to-head sphere, you have achieved some parity.
Yep.
It's just the rest of it. It's the rest of the schedule.
It's tough. I mean, the Chiefs are what you're aiming for, and it's a tough target because they're so high up there. I mean, they did go 15-1 this year in games they tried.
Yes.
It was a great.
This was their best team in record-wise. Maybe not their best team in terms of advanced analytics because they play so many close games.
So many close games. It's so ridiculous. It's so ridiculous.
It's like they know they do just enough.
Yeah.
That's part of kind of being where they are as a team.
Yeah.
It's
a skill. It's a skill.
John Facenda would say, great teams aren't always great. They're just great when they have to be.
They sure are.
All right. Frank Schwab, Yahoo Sports. Check out his work. Always fun catching up with you, my friend.
I appreciate you.
It's
thinking about today, knowing you've more than 20 years now. It's been a great friendship.
Your first year on the beat was 03, right?
03, yep.
That was the playoffs, the first of the losses to the Colts.
My God, the Colts. Oh, yeah. Those Colts games were something else, I'll tell you that.
Yeah. We've seen a lot, my friend.
That is true.
That's Frank Schwab from Yahoo Sports. I'm Andrew Mason. Thanks for watching this edition of Orange and Blue Today.